Today I'm going to show you the Andycine X7 7-inch Ultra Bright 4K compatible monitor. So full disclosure, Andycine sent this monitor out to me for free in exchange for review, and I'm always happy to do that whenever I get a quality product to share with you guys. Now this monitor costs just a little more than some of the other 7-inch Ultra Bright monitors out there. And I think it's worth the upgrade. It's about $20 or $30 more because this actually has a nice premium all-metal build to it. You know, all the way around, front and back. And I believe it's aluminum casing, and it has 3 1/4-20 screws here on the left, right, and on the bottom. So I can mount this thing very securely to just about any kind of rig without worrying about bumping into it and then breaking the plastic frame. So I don't need to buy a separate cage for this, which is really nice. It's very, very solid, just like this from this single 1/4-20 screw attachment I did here. The other thing is, you know, being all aluminum, it's really much better at dissipating heat because these things get really hot, and heat is the enemy of any kind of electronics. So being all aluminum, and then it's all ribbed here in the back, it does get hot to the touch, but you're not going to burn your fingers. You know, anything that's super bright and compact like this, it's just going to get hot. There's no way around it. But it does do a good job of dissipating the heat, I think. Now let me talk about the ports, because this is another feature I kind of like about this, is the placement of the ports. All the ports here are along the bottom of the monitor. And so I have an HDMI in, HDMI out. I also have a DC 12 volt in, so I can power this monitor from an external power source. It also has a DC out 8 volts, so that if you want to plug in a dummy battery into your camera, you can do that directly from the monitor, assuming you have a good 12 volt in. And there's also a headphone port here as well, so you can monitor the audio, assuming your HDMI cable and camera passes the audio through as well. And the other thing is, this also has a built-in speaker, so that, you know, if you don't want to plug in your headphone, you can just listen to the audio through the speaker. Now it's not very loud, but it's good enough for you to get a feel for if there's any drops in the audio, if there's excessive static, things like that. Because, you know, critical audio, you know, you're going to be monitoring that on the gear itself, the audio equipment. As for a power source, it uses NPF battery. This one came with the NPF battery. I think you can get different blades for it, but this is pretty much the standard. And I put a generic 2200 milliamp battery, and I get about 40 minutes, 45 minutes at 50% brightness, which is longer than the 30-minute limit on most cameras. But I would bring 2 or 3 batteries for every battery that you're going to use in your camera, because I get about an hour and a half out of my EM10 Mark II. So I would probably need at least 2 batteries, maybe 3, but that's not bad considering how bright this monitor is. Now you can just buy a bigger single battery. They sell 6,000 and 8,000 milliamp batteries, which will probably last just as long as the battery in the camera. But my advice is, you know, I would bring 2 batteries for every battery in your camera. All right, now the screen itself, like I said, is a 2200 nit, and it's a 1920 by 1200 resolution, but it does accept a 4K signal up to 30p, and I've heard unofficially it'll take a 60p signal, but officially it does do 4K 30p, and it can be the Cinema 4K, which is like the 4000 by something, or it can do the regular 4K Ultra HD. And then the last thing I'll mention, and this is really a personal preference, but having the ports all here along the bottom I think is a little better setup than having the ports here on the side. You know, it allows for a slimmer profile, but a lot of times when monitors have the ports on the side here, they have additional ports here on the bottom. So they might put the HDMI ports here on the side with the audio, but then the power ports will still be on the bottom. So that's really going to limit potentially your setup when you're setting up your rig. So having it all on the bottom allows me to mount this monitor on either the left or right or on the bottom. I just have to have a little bit of cable management, but for the most part I think having the ports all on one side of the monitor is a better way to go than having them separately on the side. Now this is part of a crop of new monitors coming out that are ultra bright 2200 nit, and the intent is to be able to use this monitor outdoors in bright sunlight without using a hood or shading of any kind. And I can tell you, that's the first thing I did. Is I took it outside and I put it next to another 5-inch monitor that I have. That is the standard like 450 nit, and you can see quite a bit of difference. And even at 50% brightness, this thing was more than bright enough in direct sunlight. So this monitor has all of the features you'd expect on a field monitor, and I'm just going to show you a couple that I use, and then I'll give you a summary from there. So the first thing I want to show you is just the menu system real quick and the settings I'm using. So it's pretty standard. You have your 5 categories. These are your picture modes, and you can change that, but I found standard works pretty well. But you can change color, temperature, and saturation, etc. if you needed to. We can go over to the next one. These are the settings for the on-screen display and aspect ratio. Again, everything here default is fine unless you want to make the monitor brighter, but you can do that without going into the menu. And then here are the zoom modes, and we can come back to that another time. But then here are the settings, and the ones that I turn on is I turn the center marker on, which is this little red crosshair in the center. I also like to turn on it's all the way down here, embedded audio. That's this meter over here. So if I was recording audio, you know, these meters would show me at what level I'm at, and it's all pretty accurate. And whoops, we'll go over here. And then lastly are the function buttons. So I can program these 3 function buttons, and you can see I did overexposure and zoom and false color. And F1 is primarily just the zebra. So if I click the F1 button here, you should be able to see some red lines up on the top of the pen F here. So that's telling me that those are going to be overexposed or clipped. So what I would do in the camera is I'd probably just dial in some negative exposure comp, like so, until most of those red lines go away. And now that looks pretty good. The next one here is the zoom. And we have a 4x zoom, 9x zoom, and 16x zoom. And this is really handy if you want to do some macro photography. So you can sort of lock into the focus point and then manually change it with the focus ring if you just need to do a little bit of fine tuning, like so. So if you're doing macro photography, having a large monitor that's bright like this is really helpful. Okay, let's get out of the zoom. Oops. And then the function 3 button here is the false color. And this is the one that I personally like to use instead of the zebras or even the histogram, because this shows me exactly where in the image I'm either over or underexposed. And the little color bar meter here on the right side, you know, everything up here in the red zone would be overexposed, and then down here in pink would be underexposed, possibly being clipped to black or white depending which way you're going. So what this is telling me now is that all this black area down in here, most likely that's going to be clipped to black when I'm recording video. I mean, there's some wiggle room, but it's a good guideline. So what I might do is try and balance that. So let me dial some exposure comp back in, and I'm going to do this up to just where I start to see a little bit too much red here on the top, which means those are clipped. And that's a bit too much. I might come back down. Right about there, looks good. So you can see by using the false color, I can tweak the exposure a little better than I can with just zebras alone. And I think I'll get a more balanced exposure. And yeah, to my naked eye, that looks pretty good. This monitor is really a step above all of the other monitors out there in terms of brightness and build quality, I think, at this price point. And you know, it has enough features to get you by for almost any kind of video work. I mean, it doesn't have scopes and all of those things. You can't load LUTs into it directly like all of these high-end monitors. But you know, if you have a GH5, a lot of that can be done in camera anyway. So all you really need from a monitor is for it to be bright and clear. And this one is bright, clear, and well built.